Now for a movie rant break, One Up presents a movie rant break. What's up, everybody? Welcome to the movie rant break. I'm excited to be back on the show with a returning guest. I got John Smith in the building.
Hey, you already know what the fuck going on. It's John Smith. We in this bitch. Let's get it.
Hey, all right. So today, just to get into it, we're going to be reviewing The Hobbit.
On an unexpected journey.
Yes.
Is it the unexpected journey?
It's
No.
Unexpected Journey. Directed by Peter Jackson, screenplay by Fran Walsh, Philippa Bowens, Peter Jackson, Guillermo del Toro. Sorry if I butchered that.
Guillermo.
Thank you. It's obviously based off The Hobbit, J.R.R. Tolkien's literature, produced by Carolyn Cunningham, Zane Weiner. This looks like Wiener. Zane Weiner, Fran Walsh, Peter Jackson, starring Ian McKellen, Martin Freeman, Richard Armitage, James Nesbitt, Ken Stott, Kate Blanchett, Ian Holm, Christopher Lee, Hugo Weaving, Elijah Wood, Andy Serkis. Cinematography, Andrew Lesney, edited by Jabez Olson, music by Howard Shore.
Legend.
Word. Release date was in the U.S., December 14th, 2012, with a runtime of 169 minutes. Budget is $200 to $315 million. Box office just north of $1 billion. Brief breakdown. A hobbit goes on a journey with a bunch of dwarfs to reclaim their home / castle in the mountain with, obviously, Gandalf, the wizard. There we go.
It's a mine. It's like a glorified mine.
Yeah, but they put a castle on it. And
In it, yeah. It's like a...
Don't judge me. Okay. So, first of all, I think what I want to do, just off rip with this, is I want to just acknowledge the fact that although this movie's not a bad movie, it's not, just face value, it's not terrible. It's not. Peter Jackson did a decent job. Decent performances. Music was cool. Like, all around, just okay. A little heavy on CGI in places they didn't need to, and I'm sure you're going to touch on that. But before just going over the movie, I just wanted to state how much I don't like when studios or directors or whoever the fuck is a part of doing a movie adaptation or just any type of utilization of literature. I don't like when they add a bunch of shit. Even to say in this movie, they didn't do the worst job of adding things to enhance or the attempt of enhancing a story. But point blank, what I want people to be cognizant of is it's not the same story. It's just not. And when they start adding, and specifically in this case with The Hobbit, it mostly could be a 2-part movie, and it's a 3-part, and they're not even just an hour and a half, 2 hours. We're talking the first one's got a runtime of 2 hours and 49 minutes. The second one has runtime of 2 hours and 41 minutes, and the third one has a runtime of 2 hours and 24 minutes. Obviously, it's obvious that it's monetary gains, and that obviously is annoying. And I know there's a lot of people that are disgruntled, and a lot of people probably in the middle with things, or a lot of people that don't give a fuck. But as someone that is a writer and makes content in music, and if someone was to add a bunch of shit that's not my shit and to claim it's my shit, I'd be like, that's not my shit. And so out of the respect of the author and any writer, author, musician, whatever, it's not the same thing when you're adding a bunch of shit to it. And in this case, a fuckload of shit. And we're only talking about the first film. And there's so much shit that they have added, although not poorly done per se, but the baseline is don't fucking do that. It's not what we're watching something of, it's The Hobbit, but it's not, because you're adding so much content to the original story. It's some different iteration of it. And I want people to not be okay with that, because it's essentially not the same fucking story. And you could do this with any story. If you're gonna add a bunch of shit to it, it's no longer the same story. So like, we can't call it the same thing, because it's not. It's about a hobbit that did similar things to the original story, but essentially there's a ton of other shit. Therefore, not the Hobbit.
Well, it's funny. I wanted to say this is my very first time. Don't judge me. My very first time reading content prior to watching the movie based off that content. I've never done that before, and
because we read it.
We both read
up to the part.
Hobbit up to the part where this movie ends, and honestly, I hated it. It was so unenjoyable to like have that context around what I was watching, because it makes you just constantly be like, well, this just isn't what the story is. And you start to understand why, like, there's so much more to what George R.R. Tolkien, J.R.R. Tolkien, George R.R. Martin, J.R.R. Tolkien wanted for this story, and what his envision was, and then what the iteration is completely different. And that just takes you completely out of enjoyment of the movie. Now, granted, I didn't particularly like this movie when it came out. I'm such a diehard Lord of the Rings trilogy fan that I felt like there's so much disservice they did to the world and the context of the world in the Hobbit trilogy, specifically this movie, because that's what we're talking about today. I just felt like this even enhanced that times 3, times 5, times 10, because I'm just sitting there thinking about what J.R. Tolkien wrote versus what's being put on screen, and it was really distracting, and I didn't like it. And you've dealt with this a lot, because you've read all of the Harry Potter books, for example, and watched all those movies and seen the iteration, and you can kind of compare and contrast, and you've dealt with this more than I have. I think about Gledhill, the Iceman. He's read the Dune books and then watched Dune. Like, I've never done that before. So this was very, very strange for me because of that experience that I've never experienced. And yeah, there's not only the fact that they added a bunch of shit. I mean, they added a fuckload, but they also just took away a bunch of shit too. So it's like, the time you spent adding these other storylines that you thought maybe made the story more interesting, or made it more dynamic, or made it more entertaining, that time you spent doing that, you could have just not done that and put in the stuff that you took out, because that stuff was clearly just as good, because it's a book that's held up over 100 years or whatever it is, and still is something that's seen to be one of the best pieces of literature of all time. It's like kind of silly to me that you're not only adding a bunch of unnecessary things, but you're taking out necessary things that you feel as though you don't want to put in. It's weird, dude. It's a weird concept. But I did read that Peter Jackson. Yes, Peter Jackson. He wanted to make this his own story, apparently. Like, that was like a mission of his when he went into it, which I think is silly. Guillermo del Toro was originally supposed to be the one to create this story. He was going to be the director of it. And pretty much there was like pre-production delays, whatever the case is. He ends up dropping out.
He produced some of it, I think.
He did, but like Peter Jackson ended up stepping in and taking over the director role reluctantly, because he didn't particularly want to do it. He was exhausted from that time he had spent doing The Lord of the Rings. He wanted to step back in more of a producer role, but he ended up having to be the director just out of necessity, because Guillermo del Toro backed out. So and you can see it. The other fundamental issue with the way this whole thing was filmed is that there was, going into Lord of the Rings, they did like literally 3 years of pre-production. And that's not just like, that's not filming pre-production. That's just staging shots, building sets, building all of this stuff that goes into making this movie perfect. The movie's perfect, I guess I should say, the Lord of the Rings trilogy. They did like they pretty much blocked out every single shot that was going to be in the film prior to even starting filming it. Whereas this one was like 3 months of pre-production. Like, they just wung the fuck out of it. And like, you can see it, you can feel it. Whereas in the Lord of the Rings series, you feel like you're in Middle Earth because they shot so much on set, so much practical stuff. Everything was real and it felt like you were there in this world. This one feels like you're on set the entire time and everything's in CG and they're on green screens everywhere because they were, right? That's what the case was. And it felt like that from the day I watched it. And even though the CGI was pretty good for its time, CGI just doesn't have that everlasting effect that shooting live action, real practical sets feels. It's not the same feeling and it never will be. So it's frustrating because you want this to feel the same way as Lord of the Rings does. You want to get that same energy from it, and it just doesn't have it. And you're kind of trying to pinpoint why the entire time you're watching it. But if you kind of sit back and look at the difference between the way they were produced and also the difference between the way they were shot and comprised and set up to begin with, it's the reason, right? It's just completely different. They didn't prepare the same way they did for the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and it shows.
Yeah, and there's certain things I get why they might have made changes. Like I appreciated the prologue thing they had in the beginning with showing the origins of the dwarves and how they lost it to smog and all this shit. Like I like the prologue. That's not talked about in length in the book.
It's mentioned, yeah.
It's mentioned, but like it's a much greater length in the movie. So that's a cool addition that I think you can do. And what do you call it? What's the Silmarillion? What's the book called?
Silmarillion.
So allegedly they had used that for additions within the movies for justification. It's like, oh, we utilized all the types of literature to try to add justful additions. But that being said, the prologue was okay, and then, they add Frodo at the beginning, which is like fine.
I love that. I love having it set up be like the day that Gandalf is coming. I think that was cool. I just felt like it didn't really make sense that Bilbo was narrating that entirely because he was talking about Erebor as if he was there and that he saw it when it was at its full beauty, and he's like telling the story as if he was a part of it. And it's like he never saw that. He maybe read about it, but like he was saying it as if he was there. He's like, it was beautiful, Frodo, you've never seen before. And it's like you've only saw it after it was like demolished by smog. Like you weren't there when it was at its beauty.
Yeah, yeah,
it's weird.
It's so subtle differences that they had to do also with casting because is it Ian Holm played the Bilbo.
Yeah, the older Bilbo.
Yeah, so he's older. So naturally, the cast with Martin Freeman, I think his name is, there's a weird disparity and it doesn't line up correctly as far as when he would go on his journey. And I get that.
Gandalf even says when he sees Bilbo the first time in Lord of the Rings, he's like, you haven't aged a day. It's
yes.
like, well,
yeah, so like that.
How do you look so different?
Yeah, like so that premise, I get it, and I like the transition between the smoke blowing, the ring blowing, and it goes to where the story actually takes place in the book when Gandalf approaches Bilbo at his doorstep.
Yeah.
So I thought like that kind of shit was acceptable, but pretty much everything after the beginning, I thought, like you had said, you could have just stuck with the source material and still made a 2-hour movie. Without changing all these unnecessary changes, with extra battles, extra character moments and character building moments, like I think they call it the White Council or something with Saruman and Galadriel and Gandalf. Like that conversation doesn't happen, and although cool to watch on screen, that's not what happened, and it's such a character building moment for all those characters that when you think about it, it's just dumb. It's like we're talking about Potter. Because I'm pretty fluent in the literature, it's like having Hermione having conversations privately with Dumbledore that was not presented in the book, but now Hermione's talking to Dumbledore on the side just because they're trying to fill some. Well, it just wouldn't make sense.
It breaks some continuity too. It's like it doesn't. You can tell that Saruman is inept at that point, and if you're Gandalf, you going into being like, "This is my advisor." And knowing that he was completely wrong about Sauron's reemergence, that's just strange. Plus, it doesn't make any sense in regards to like the idea of Gandalf being so surprised by like the ring and what the ring is in Lord of the Rings. Remember how he like goes all the way to Gondor to like do some research on what this ring could be, and he's almost like learning it for the first time because it was thousands of years prior, right? It's weird because in this one it's almost like he knows Sauron and he's aware of his resurgence possibly, and therefore he would obviously have his mind focused on where does Sauron get his power. He would have done that research prior rather than like being as if he was looking at it for the first time in the Lord of the Rings. It's just weird. There's so much continuity stuff that it kind of breaks by adding that whole sequence, and I get why you're doing it. You're doing it for familiarity purposes and that's Saruman, that's Galadriel, and that's just silly to do that in break continuity. This story is almost supposed to be a small story in ways, right? And that's what kind of made it beautiful from reading the book, and my understanding of the book all this time is that it's supposed to be a small story that doesn't really have a massive impact on Middle Earth. It's just Gandalf helping out some friends more than anything, right? And making it this big encompassed story that has to do with Middle Earth and the how Middle Earth will come to be in the future. That's what Lord of the Rings is for. That's not what this is for. This is supposed to be a smaller kind of event, right?
Isolated event for sure.
Yeah, it's silly. And then I want to also say, because going back to the narration, the reason Galadriel's narration at the beginning of the Lord of the Rings works is because Galadriel's like this, eternal being who has seen the world throughout all of its ages because she hasn't aged and hasn't died, and she's been around for thousands of years, right? Bilbo saying that narration is confusing to me because it's like he just doesn't have that kind of longevity to him to be able to have that perspective. So it's just strange.
The reason they did that is because he's the author of The Hobbit.
Right. I know.
So,
but that's the other thing too. In the book, who is the
narrator?
It's weird. It's not Bilbo.
I think it's Tolkien. That's why it's like kind of cool.
Yeah.
But I think by the end of it, it is. It wouldn't make sense that it's Bilbo because there's a bunch of references which I appreciate in the book where like they reference how Elrond plays a bigger part in a different story later on. And Bilbo couldn't necessarily make that distinction if he was the narrator. 100%. So I have the impression that it's Tolkien.
That's talking. The way I felt too, yeah.
But maybe it's not, but that's how it perceives to be. Okay, so that's kind of the intro to what's going on. Right?
Yeah.
So let's get into like some of the things in the movie and we can circle back to that premise because I feel like that's how we should close and like reiterate kind of the same thing.
Right.
And like I said in my opening argument or disclaimer is I think it could work as a 2-part movie. Like totally could work as and it could be 2.5 hours. The fact that it's over 7 hours for this 300 and something page book is stupid and such a disservice to the author. And I honestly feel for the man. And maybe he would have liked some of the additions, but nonetheless, can't know for sure. So I just think taking those liberties is a really distasteful thing to do in the world of art.
Well, I think expanding on some of the things that were referenced in the book is not the worst thing. Like, for example, the whole necromancer Doggle thing, like that was mentioned in the book, right? He said he actually told Thorin about it when they were sitting in Bilbo's house. And that's when he told him that his dad was captured by the necromancer. And that's where he ended up getting the key. And he was stuck there and he couldn't save him because he was too far gone. The only thing he could remember was the map and the key, right? And so I think expanding on stuff like that's mentioned in the book is one thing. I think going in and creating a whole new character that's an antagonist throughout the entire thing, which is the white orc or the pale orc, is just silly. It's like, why are you doing this? It's not something that's it's not even something referenced in The Hobbit. Why are you making it a whole plot line that it's referenced? He's referenced, but he's referenced in a past event, not something in a present event.
Yeah,
right?
So he is mentioned, but he's not by any means
right. So to me, it's like, I think that just taking your liberty and saying, hey, I'm going to add a whole storyline. And I know why they did it. A lot of The Hobbit throughout the story is just about traveling and the struggles of that travel and the starvation and the terrible conditions they're in.
The orcs and shit like that. There is orcs, but it's not as heavily.
Of course, but instead you're like, we need to keep this story continuously having action, and we need to add some kind of antagonist chasing them, so we have action throughout it. And it's like, no, you don't. You could have spent that time doing character stuff along that journey and showing that struggle and showing that pain and building upon that. If you wanted to spend the extra time and make the extra time in the movies, you could have done more of that and less of this. I need to just create a story that's continuously having these action-packed moments to push the story along. It's like when movies do this, they don't realize how disengaging it is for a viewer rather than engaging. It makes it almost like, oh, okay, next thing they're going through. Okay, now's another thing. Oh, now the rock monsters. Oh, now the orc.
Well, the rock monsters were in it.
But they weren't on this rock monster, right? Like they weren't a part of the battle. Bilbo just sees it, right? And that's more interesting to me than them being like, oh, you got to jump off this thing into this thing. It's like, dude,
it was already cool. The giants throwing rocks and thunderstorms was cool. You didn't need to create this struggle within that. And I think this problem persists in all three of them. And we'll get into that when we get to the other ones, but a lot of these things and themes and issues in this film is present through the whole trilogy, and rightfully so because of the approach they took, which was, we're going to add a bunch of shit and
make this our own story.
And so that's going to cause problems. And now that you're in the position of reading source material, you realize how annoying and disruptive it is when people don't stick to the books. And I will say the Potter ones, shout out to Steve Kloves, the screenplay writer, did a phenomenal job, especially with some of the huge books that he's dealing with and still trying to keep the story informative enough and engaging enough. And that's why also... I'll skip on that point. But it's very different when you know what the fuck going on with source material and you see something on the big screen. It's just because you know, especially we just read it the day before,
right?
Ish. So you're like, oh, they should be going and doing this, and now like there was no.
It's disruptive.
It's disruptive. There's no. Encounter with orcs on their way to Rivendell, you know what I mean? And how they get to Rivendell is totally different.
Totally different.
And it's just like, you don't, like I said, make it a 2-part movie and stay true to source material, and the character building, everything will pay off, like more or less in the second film, you could say. But there is still stuff that could be in the first one that would be enjoyable because you're seeing the story go from page to screen, and it's really got to be for the fans and to the author and keep it true to that, because otherwise, what are we doing here? Because you're writing, it's just not the same story. So,
and like even just starting at the beginning, right? When I think like something that when I was interpreting what I was reading, the way the dwarfs are depicted, don't get me wrong, there's parts of them that are silly and ridiculous in the book, but that whole sequence inside of Bilbo's house felt so much more like sinister and dark, and not sinister, I guess I should say, more of like a really serious, dark conversation that like turned into something that was completely I don't know the exact word I'm looking for, but very in depth in regards to
intent.
Intent, and even intense too. Like I think that's another word. It was an intense moment of trying to figure out what their game plan is and what's going on, and talking about it for a long, long time. Whereas this one just felt like they made the dwarf so goofy and ridiculous and silly and like almost dumb in ways. And that almost takes away from the sincerity of what they were trying to accomplish in ways. And the other thing that they added in that whole sequence is like, I feel there was more intrigue from Bilbo to begin with. They almost created this different story about how Bilbo was interpreting the whole situation, more reluctant and more like, no, I don't want to do this. There was moments where he was like, oh, a map, like I want to look at it. But in the book, he was like really curious. Like the Took side of him was coming out a lot more in that scenario where he was very interested but really nervous at the same time, but really interested, wanted to do it, but he was nervous. This was more like, nope, I don't want to do it. Why are you in my house? I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this the whole entire time. It's
See, I thought both the book and the movie, I don't think it depicts a good, convincing argument as to why Bilbo went on the journey. I think in the book, and they change it as far as how it unfolds and how it goes with Bilbo chasing after the dwarves. In the book, Gandalf is there the next morning, and I'm pretty sure it's a mess. The dwarves don't help clean up. It's all a mess, I thought. So it was weird. They had like a cleaning sequence helping, and then they go sing, which there's a lot of singing in this, but there is in the book. But he leaves differently with, in the book, Gandalf kind of suggests that he should go, and he just kind of like gets up and goes. I didn't think in the book there was a convincing argument. He was way too agreeable of going on this journey that he could die on.
well,
Like,
there was a reason, I think in the book, and from what I gather, there was a reason Gandalf chose Bilbo. And that's because he knew what he was as a kid and how adventurous he was, and he knew his family bloodline, right? Like the family bloodline of the Tooks are just, and that's his mother, are so adventurous and actually are the only hobbits that go out on adventures. And he knew Bilbo as a child and knew how adventurous he was. So I think that's why it made more sense to me, because it was like, this is something that Bilbo longs for. And
but
doesn't know it because he's just been kind of encapsulated in this Baggins kind of situation, where in the movie it just doesn't seem like that at all. It just seems like he's just, I'm this old kind of, I don't do anything ever and I never want to do anything, and then all of a sudden he's just like, I'm gonna go. Like,
I think in both it's similar. Granted, there's the suggestion that in the book it talks about why Gandalf more or less felt he was a good choice with the lineage and his mother being a gangster.
yeah.
But he just seemed a little too agreeable to go on the journey. Like I mean, you could persecute me for saying this, but I don't think it was written the best to make me think that it's believable. Granted, it's a fucking hobbit going on a journey of dwarfs, but I just I was confused. I was like, what? Like I read it twice. I was like, what made him go? And it just seemed like there was nothing like outside of like suggestive themes. So in the movie, I think that's why they emphasized on it more. But even that, he just like gets up and goes.
I think they made it worse in the movie, personally.
But yeah,
either I get it.
I didn't care for how Bilbo gets out on the journey with the dwarfs, personally.
Yeah.
So that was obviously different.
But don't you feel like the dwarves were like presented just differently than
100%? They could have made them way more rugged and serious toned rather than making satirical representations of dwarfs.
Right.
The silly drunk dwarf. But I think on this journey, like if there was one, that's fine. But a whole half of them were jokey and
and not only that, but
silly.
It's almost like the elves. They made the elves more serious and the dwarves more silly, where I feel like in the books it was almost opposite, where the elves were really like silly and fun, and
they were,
and the dwarves were more serious and on a mission, right? Where it's kind of interesting. I also feel as though just the interactions, the dwarves' interactions with one another is good in ways in the movie, and I think that it also depicts the book pretty well. But there's just something missing, and I can't really pinpoint it when I'm watching it. I'm just like, this just doesn't feel entirely natural, and doesn't feel like you said, believable, even though it is dwarves and a wizard.
Wizards are real.
Facts.
Did you? Okay, so let's jump back to some changes. Radagast. Okay, so I like Radagast the character, and it's cool that he gets some limelight, and I don't think it was the worst thing to expand on in the movie. That being said, I mean, it was cool to see him ball out against the orcs with his rabbits, slay of rabbits. Like, it was cool. I'm not tripping. Like,
He's a Rustabill rabbit.
Yeah, like it was kind of swagged out. I liked it.
To see him try.
Yeah, like it was dope. He had like bird shit on his face and stuff, and he's just balling on with his slay of rabbits. Like, it was cool, but it's not the story.
Yeah,
and so it's like Do something, I don't know, do a spin-off, like, if you want. Like, if you're going to disservice the source material, do a spin-off that's about a character like Radagast, rather than be like, we're taking one of the 4 pieces of the crowning jewels, like, don't fuck with that.
Right. Well, and that's the thing, like, time, I feel as though it was represented really poorly in this. The book explains how much time has gone by in their journey and how much struggle there is. And just seeing them before they meet with the trolls, for example, and during that sequence, Bilbo is literally bringing them food, Keely and whatever. He's bringing them bowls of food.
Talking about the troll sequence?
Yeah, like right before it. And like in that sequence, the reason they even went and explored the fire on the hill from the trolls was because they were starving. Like that, because of the trip being so long and they're not having any food and them losing it all when their ponies got lost or whatever the case is. Like,
they didn't lose their ponies.
No, not their ponies. Sorry, one of their ponies had all the food on it and it got swept away in the river. So remember, they were starving. The pony went into the river. Something.
I, for some reason, don't.
Yeah, so the pony went in the river. All the food was on the pony. The food went away. They were starving. The trip had been long, wet, terrible, miserable. And then all of a sudden they saw the light on the hill. So they were like, we got to go check in on this. Bilbo, go look at it. You're the burglar. So that way we can see if there's food over there.
And they slowly get captured as they go. They don't charge in.
100%. And that's the other thing, too. They made the dwarves so much more heroic than in the book. The book, dwarves were so inept in so many ways. Gandalf literally always just would save them. They did nothing, in the book, and in the movie is always like the dwarves being this heroic, stand up and fight kind of thing. Like even the sequence at the end with the orcs coming in with the trees and all stuff. I have a lot more to say about that sequence, but even that, like,
charge.
They all charge and fight. In the book, they're just up in the tree, like, Gandalf, save us. Like, what are we gonna do? Yeah. It's just interesting how they decided to do that. And I get it. You want to like build these characters to be more than just, guys just that have no skill set or capability or no leadership or no heroism. But at the same time, it's just funny how you interpret it that way. But that whole sequence with the trolls, I guess what I'm getting at is it's so much more interesting to me seeing the struggles of this journey and having it feel like it's actually taking time, as opposed to it feeling like it was 4 days before they met the trolls, because everything's so easy and they got food and, they got to get past this. Oh, but then they're there and then they're there. It's like you making the story have to move that quickly also does a disservice to how long and terrible this journey really was. And that's something that I think adds value to not only the story itself, but the characters within that story, seeing that struggle and seeing how they handle that difficulty.
Adversity, yeah. And in the same instance with Lord of the Rings, with the journey between the trio and then Frodo and Sam, it's a fucking journey, and you feel it and you live through it, where this is supposed to have that. And that's why I think if you want to do 2 parts, I think it could work. And you take the time to make it feel like a journey, and you have that instance where they're hungry and they're desperate and things are getting rocky, and instead of just these engaging, fighting, exciting or allegedly exciting moments, because it's not what fucking happened, and it's not creating the same type of energy of a journey movie. This has now become like a fucking war movie, which it's really not. Yeah. It's, the unexpected journey. So.
And that's a great reference, because I think the way Peter Jackson spent the time on Frodo and Sam's struggle, food, tiredness, lost, you feel them withering away through that time period. And seeing Sam's little bright moments throughout that journey where he is still staying positive, you're like, how? You're like, how can he do this? Look how miserable this is, and how much terrible stuff they've gone through, and how long this has taken, and how much they don't have food and they don't have resources and they're all alone. And you feel that struggle throughout it. And so when the character development in that, to see Sam still be positive and see Frodo still push on even through all the hard things, it gives you so much emotion, because you feel like you're going along that ride with them. Whereas with this, you didn't feel any of that. So you didn't feel the emotion that you were going on anything with them. You just felt like you were going along for the ride that they were on, right? And ride is a perfect example. This felt like you even said one part, which is funny. You said the sequence with the goblins felt like it could be a cool Universal ride, which is funny. But it felt like that. It felt like I was on a ride that I was like watching the stuff happen, and I was like, okay, like this is
Versus
the
a
stuff
journey.
happening. Versus being a part of that journey and going through the suffering with them.
Yeah. And it does that, I think, top to bottom with this trilogy. And it's too bad because it's a journey movie and it's a story, and it doesn't feel like that. And I think that's because they added all this shit and changed stuff, and and it's weird because you lose in those instances where you're implementing action sequences rather than having a little slower pace character moment of chit-chatting and what have you. It enriches the story so much more. And
I couldn't agree with that more.
And it's like this movie feels like you're on a ride with a bunch of dwarven extras besides Thorin. Thorin's the only one that's like he's good. And
Thorin is extra. Like, he's so extra at so many points in time, which is funny because you said extras and then I said he's extra. But he is so extra. Like, watching when his dad died and he's like, no! Oh my God. Too much.
Well, yeah, so it takes away and just doesn't... Because, like, imagine if Frodo and Sam sequences, it was them fighting all the time instead of worrying about the elven bread rations that they had. It just completely changes the dynamic of the
And it
story.
wouldn't be good, honestly. It would have been bad.
Yeah, as much as I don't like Return of the King sequences where they're just fucking hiking up this rock face, it's still necessary.
100%.
And I appreciate the time they took to do it. Yeah. So back to the troll situation where, we're talking about things that have changed. Also, Bilbo has a hero moment with helping them escape the situation with the trolls, which is supposed to be Gandalf. And that kind of shit bothers me sometimes when they take character moments away from other characters to try to emphasize a different hero. And when it's like, that's not what they did. And one big one is in Potter, which weirdly, it's not the worst thing, but like before I read the books, right? Like Hermione, when they're in Gringotts, she's the one, I have this crazy idea, you're not going to like it, and they're trying to get the fuck out and they get on the dragon. That is... And I'm spoiling this for when I go to do this episode, but that's Potter's moment. That's Potter does that in the book. Potter's like, let's get on the dragon. They get on the dragon. They dip the fuck out of Gringotts. And it was weird. With Hermione, it was dope because, shout out to Emma Watson. She's fucking dope. And that was sick that Hermione did it. But that's like Potter's moment where they escape Gringotts like with no options with a fucking dragon. Like that's Harry Potter's moment. It's not Hermione Granger. So like it's a weird choice to switch that, and I think this is a smaller scale, but it's like Gandalf's the one that saves them, and it ruins the whole like Gandalf keeps saving them on this journey thing by having Bilbo do it, and it just changes the dynamic.
I agree, and there's two major conflicts. I wouldn't even say major, maybe even like minor, like sub stories that they pushed into this narrative in the movie that I don't like, and I didn't like prior to even reading the book. One is this conflict, this internal conflict of Bilbo not being accepted. That wasn't something that existed, right? And nor do I think it needed to exist. It was this Bilbo isn't accepted. It's like once he signed the contract, you're a part of us. Like, let's go rock and let's go do this. Instead of it being like, you don't belong here, go home. You shouldn't be here anyway. So because of that, they felt like they need to have a moment where he showed his worth in that troll situation, as opposed to in the book, he's like,
well, the orc moment shows when he like gets the full approval.
Of course, 100%. And we can talk about more of that later. But this was a minor moment of that where they felt like they needed to have him step up and like be a reason for him to be around, so that way they can have some more of this conflict resolution that they're working on. The second one is the conflict between the dwarves and the elves, right? There's this, and I think they were trying to build off of the reason why there was this elven dislike in the Lord of the Rings between Gimli and Legolas to begin with, and they said they became friends and worked together. But I never thought it was a good idea to have this weird conflict of the elves could have came and saved them when, first of all, they fucking marched their whole army to this mountain from wherever the fuck they came from when the dragon attacks, right? To just like turn away and walk away? Like, why are you marching your whole army there if you're not going to even help anybody? What the fuck are you doing?
Maybe they just thought the dwarves could help out a little. They're like, y'all just, none of you can compete. So like, we're not going to subject yourself to.
I guess, but it's just.
I can see that though.
So that's where you start the conflict off at. And then the entire time I had to hear Thorin fucking bitch about how he hates the elves and how he doesn't want to go to Rivendell because he hates the elves. And the elves didn't help his family. And so they, they are not good people or whatever. It's like, fucking, who cares, dude? Like, why are you doing this? It adds nothing to the story. It makes nothing more interesting. But instead it takes away from what you could have experienced with like more awe and like, because I think if you take the dwarves, right, and you bring them into Rivendell, and they're like, oh my God, this is so different and so interesting and so cool. And granted, like, we don't really trust the elves, but wow, like, this is something completely different that we've never seen before. That's a more interesting thing to go along with, in the sense of, I feel like I'm experiencing with them the first time of Rivendell. I feel like they didn't do that in this movie because they felt like they already achieved that in The Lord of the Rings. So they didn't want to, they felt like it would land flat if it was like, oh, now we're experiencing Rivendell for the first time with the dwarves, and they get to be in awe of how the beauty and the way the people act and interact, because we already experienced that with Frodo and the hobbits going there in The Lord of the Rings. But I just don't particularly like the unneeded conflict that they've added with the elves not being a part of helping them with Smaug, and that therefore Thorin has this thing against the elves, and it's silly to me. It's silly and stupid.
Yeah, I agree. Last thing I was going to say about the trolls is, did you think it was a disservice to the dwarves how they added them charge and have this scene where they're attacking the trolls? But did you feel that it was a disservice to the representation of the skill of the dwarves, or do you think that's the pocket they should be in? They can't take on 3 trolls because Legolas and everybody, like the gangsters of the originals, they body bagged some trolls, like many of them at once, and there was 12 dwarves catching, or 12 because there's
14 total. Yeah, Gandalf, I guess. Yeah,
and Bilbo. So yeah, 12. They couldn't, by surprise, knock down 3. I don't know. Did you think it was a disservice to them? Because I felt like it kind of was. Or maybe they're that much of pussies. I don't know.
No, I mean, dwarves are good warriors, but they're also very small.
And they did say that there's not a lot of warriors with them. Like, they're not all like warriors.
Yeah, one of them had a fucking what is it?
Slingshot. Yeah, I was like, bro, come on. Why bring that guy along? Like,
get your weight up. Dude. Yeah, no, and I don't think so. I mean, they didn't even fight him at all in the original book. They were more just like, what's going on here? Fuck, I'm in a bag.
That's why I'm saying, was it a disservice to have them fight and then they all get body bagged? And it was just like weird. It's just like another moment that didn't happen, that it creates a different depiction of the characters that you're watching, because especially in this case, Lord of the Rings characters, you know what the capabilities are of fucking Aragorn and Legolas and Gimli and shit, and then you see these motherfuckers, you're like, these scrubs, but it's not actually what they did, but they're adding it, so it's like,
yeah, but even Aragorn, Gandalf, Legolas, Gimli, all of them had a really hard time with one cave troll, and these are mountain trolls, which I think are even bigger. I'm not sure, but I don't think so.
That's fine. I just was curious.
The other thing I would say is this: like, that whole sequence was so silly too. There was so much silliness with the dwarves. They were acting like this wasn't a big deal. They're like getting cooked, but they're not getting cooked, and everybody's joking and laughing. And in the book, it just felt like it was so much more serious. It was so much more like, oh shit,
dire.
Yeah, dire, exactly. And I feel like that would have hit harder. I feel like you would have been, if you felt this dire feeling instead of it just being like silly and goofy. It's almost like, when you make this movie, you feel like, oh, everybody's read the book, so they know everybody's going to survive. So we need to just make this fun and entertaining because they're not going to die, and everybody knows that. It's like, no, dude, you can make it feel like this is the end and this is where they fail, and you can give us that energy, not just take it away with this comedy that doesn't particularly need to exist.
Agreed, 100%. One thing that was a question with the book as well is why did Gandalf decide to help the dwarves on their quest?
That's a good question. Yeah. I don't know.
You don't know? Okay, so allegedly, and this is the White Council meeting with Saruman.
Mm-hmm.
This is why adding that scene I thought was decent, because they were trying to allude to the fact that Gandalf was helping them because he was concerned about the growing power of Sauron, the necromancer,
right,
and believes that the dragon Smaug could somehow be utilized to utilized to destroy Middle Earth.
right.
So that allegedly is his intent, and they allude to that in that meeting where he was concerned about dark forces. But Sauron and Smaug, which would be fire as fuck in like an alternate situation to have Sauron and Smaug. But I thought in the book it didn't explain that. Man, that's in this. What's the other book called? This Silmarillion. Silmarillion. Say it again. Silmarillion. So maybe that's in there. I don't know. But
the Silmarillion is about like history mostly, ancient times.
Okay. So maybe not. But I don't know where they're pulling that, but that's what it's alluding to, I guess, which makes sense. But they don't specifically say it in the book. Maybe they do in the back end. We just read the segment that's associated with this movie. Right. And I only read The Hobbit one other time. So like I'm not super fluent in its contents. The performances overall, I mean, I'll say at least with Bilbo and Gandalf, really solid. I like the cast for Bilbo. He's a good actor. Martin Freeman.
Yeah.
And obviously Ian McKellen, savage.
Body bags. Yeah, I think the casting was fine for them. And I think, obviously for Gandalf is great.
And I thought the acting was fine for what the script was. Those dwarves were acting the way they were because that was the tone in the script. Right. I think everyone acted well. I don't think anything was...
No, there was no issue.
I will say, we should talk about this for a second, is, okay, Dwalin, the first dwarf that ends up knocking on the door, his makeup on his scalp did not look good.
Terrible. I think, and you said this, and I had said in response, and I still believe this, you can just tell that the costume design and makeup and prosthetics and everything was just shortchanged. It was so realistic in Lord of the Rings. It felt so realistic. Like even Gimli, like, dude, you look at Gimli, you're like, you could question whether he's even wearing prosthetics in the sense of how good it looks, right? This one is, everything is so questionable, and even just believability when it comes to the outfits they're wearing and the way they look in the environment, just not up to standard.
It's not good. With that dude's head, you could see the colors blending, and just some of them just look cheap. Like even Bilbo's, his like double corduroy. It's the little things in costume design, like just like a pin or something in some instances, or like some of the, in this case, the dwarves had like beard ornaments and stuff, like just little shit to swag them out and just make it not appear that it's a play. And I would say play in the sense of low budget,
right?
Where it's like, this is our costume for the dwarfs in the play for the Hobbit. That's what it kind of felt like
in ways,
with the simplicity of the costumes for some of them. And I get it, they're the less significant ones, but it doesn't mean their costume designs need to be ass,
right?
And the hair for one of them had like these three, I don't know what the fuck was going on with it, but it looked atrocious.
I feel it. Yeah, I think they were trying to make all of them as distinct as they could, so that way it didn't feel like you were just watching a replica of 13 different individuals or 12 different individuals.
Yeah, but they failed on that. Have you ever seen anything regarding Ian McKellen and the filming process, and how, I think specifically in this film, the sequences within the Hobbit hole were really challenging for him because he had to do them by himself because
he broke into tears at one point in time.
Allegedly, right? Like, I thought there's like, they had like pictures I thought I had seen. I don't know why there's pictures of him crying, but
well, yeah, he was really struggling because, so this is the reason this whole thing happened. This movie was shot in I think 48 frames per second or something, or like something weird, a higher frame rate, 50 or 48 or something. Because apparently,
Gonna be like 30 or 60.
I don't think, no, it was in between there somewhere. And the reason is because I guess this is how the human eye perceives things, so they wanted to do it as close to the human eye as possible. And then they also shot it in 3D for the entire thing, and they shot it. There was something else, but nonetheless, because of that, they couldn't do. Because it's 3D, you have to shoot with two cameras, so you couldn't do forced perspective. So they were like, "Oh, we can't do forced perspective, so we're just gonna have to green screen everything and superimpose stuff into shots to be able to make the sizing of the characters make sense." So Gandalf being as big as he is around everybody else, and because they ended up having to do that for every shot, it completely changed the fabric of how these shots would look. Instead of Gandalf being there in the Hobbit hole and having a forced perspective show the difference in sizes, they were just literally having him be alone in a room filming. And
with like heads on popsicle sticks.
100%. Yeah. And he was going through it because he's like a really traditional classical actor. And it was not an easy thing for him to go through. But I also think it just did a big disservice to all of the interactions in the movie because they feel less natural because you don't have two actors in a room together. And I think when you have that personal interaction, I mean, even when you were watching Thanos in Endgame and in Infinity War specifically, like Brolin was sitting there in the room. He just had a big stick over his head that had where Thanos' head is because he's so much bigger, but he was sitting there acting right there with the other actor he's interacting with to be able to make it that real feeling of the two characters or two actors being in the same space together. This movie, I can't tell you how many times, and this is something I felt prior when I watched it the first time. I was like, everything seems CGI or green screened. Everything. Mm-hmm. And it bothered the living fuck out of me. And one of the specific places, and I don't mean to divert too far away, but one of the specific places that it bothered me the most was the whole sequence inside the Misty Mountains and with the goblins, right? First and foremost, I double, triple cross-referenced this before I said it because I wanted to make sure I was right. Goblins and orcs are the same thing. They're not a different species. And so this movie made it and depicted it as if they're completely two different species. And that bothers the living fuck out of me. Like, they don't look anything like the orcs do. They look like these weird, gooply, gobbly creatures.
Well, the orcs I thought were larger type. Because that's how I was debating Lord of the Rings. Because remember they do like... Or is it the Orc-Eye?
Orc-Eye are a mix between orcs and like elves or whatever. Like they're a mixed breed.
It's orcs and elves.
I think it's something like that or something along those lines.
How do I spell Orc-Eye? Please tell me.
I don't know. I'm sorry. I think it's U-R-A.
No.
Yeah, it's like Urukai.
Oh, fucks with you?
Yeah. U-R-A-K-A-I, I think. There's a space between the two or something. Maybe there's an H in there somewhere.
U-R-U-K-H-A-E or H-A-I.
Yeah, there's an H.
Or a Kai.
Yeah, so they're like a mixed breed. But orcs and goblins are the exact same thing. And so when you bring us into this...
The strongest breed of orc. Sorry, I just keep going.
You're good. You bring us into the sequence... into the Misty Mountains, and there's these full CGI characters that are called goblins that look like a completely different race than orcs, speak differently than orcs do, act differently than orcs do, and are completely goofy and weird looking and look like a different race. I think that sequence looks worse than anything I've ever seen in a Lord of the Rings movie or Lord of the Rings world. I think that is the worst sequence of all time. I think back to the Mines of Moria in the Fellowship of the Ring, and they're like goblins, right? Remember when Legolas is like goblins?
Dude, goblins are different because it says the orcs, Uruk-hai is orcs with goblin men. I don't know, like I was under the impression that goblins were smaller than orcs and like I don't know.
No.
And the Uruk-hai were once elves and now become like...
Right. They're they were once elves and they're mixed with goblins, which are orcs.
Okay.
So that's my point is like goblins, I triple checked this before I went in. Like goblins and orcs are the same. So I think back to the Mines of Moria, for example, in the Fellowship of the Ring, and you have Legolas says goblins. And then remember when they come out all the crevices and they're surrounded in Moria right before Balrog comes? Mm-hmm. Right? Did you remember what they look like aesthetically in that sequence? Scary as fuck.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Like they are the scariest looking fucking things. I would be fucking shitting myself. And then the whole sequence where they're fighting the cave troll, the goblins come in and they're fucking attacking them. Like that's what I envision goblins to look like. Not these like gobbledygook fucking CGI messes that look ridiculous. You know what I mean? And if you had made this exact sequence darker, right? You made it darker inside the mountain, which it should be. And you made it almost like horror-esque with those creatures popping out of places and chasing them like they had in the book. And you had them like popping up and fucking... Then the Goblin King is like this massive fucking human being. Like, that's like this fucking fat, massive goblin orc thing. You know what I mean? You could have made it so much more terrifying, which is the way it should have been. It's like, this is a terrifying sequence. You're in behind enemy lines and you are surrounded by these. Instead, it felt like this fucking goofy, fun little ridiculous sequence. And it's like, why, dude? You missed such a sick opportunity to be able to make like a scary, really dark, realistic, fucking terrifying moment, almost similar to the Mines of Moria. That's the way that was depicted and felt. It felt like this freaky shit. We're surrounded behind enemy lines. We don't have anywhere we can go, etc. And because of that, you felt that terror. And in this, you don't feel any terror at all. You don't feel anything at all. You just feel like there's characters running through a CGI mess around a bunch of CGI fucking messes, and you're no stakes at all. It fucking blows my mind. It blew my mind from the second I watched it, when I first watched this movie, because I'm such a diehard Lord of the Rings trilogy fan. I was like, holy fucking shit, what am I looking at? Bothered the fuck out of me.
So the worst thing in the Hobbit film was the Misty Mountain sequence with all the goblins.
In my perspective, hands down, no questions asked. It was fucking awful.
Mainly because of the tone and the CGI.
100%.
Okay.
And then the second most awful thing is, this is arguable. Like, there's moments, but like I think throughout the trilogy, the worst thing that happens, and specifically in this movie, is I just hate the way the pale orc looks. The fact that they made him a CGI mess and they didn't use a real... Think about if you casted someone the size of like The Rock to play that position and painted him white and fucking massive, put a bunch of prosthetics on him, made him look scary as fuck. Like, that would be so fucking sick. I think back to the Fellowship of the Ring again, and the leader of the Orcai, find the halflings! Find the halflings! Like, that fucking guy... That's a scary motherfucker. And you're like terrified when he's fucking holding the arrow up to Boromir after he's already put 3 in him and he's about to fucking smack another one in him. And then fucking Aragorn comes and hits him and shit. You're like, bro, what the fuck? But imagine if they made him CGI in that movie. How fucking dumb that sequence would feel.
Agreed.
Oh my goodness, it would be terrible. And that's what we had to deal with for this whole fucking movie. If you want to put this fucking antagonist into this story that doesn't exist in the book, that I don't think adds any value to the story, and the least you can do is make it look real, not like this big fucking cartoon character in the middle of a fucking movie. I don't understand it. Fucking blows my mind. And it's all because they fucking penny pinched and had to make it quick. And
they didn't penny pinch. It was over 200 million, but...
Well, I mean...
They rushed it.
They rushed it. That's what I mean. Sorry. But, yeah, anyway. Sorry, that's my rant. Right, we are on the movie rant break.
You're done. Yo, quick question. Was the Arkenstone in the book?
I don't know because I didn't keep reading. Maybe it was, but I don't think so. It's a good question.
Because that was one thing that when I was watching the movie, it referenced it. And I know it comes up in the other movies.
Yeah, it's a major part. But they made it, like, almost as important as, like, the... I don't know. Like, it made it this thing that's, like, If you have the Arkenstone, you're the king of the castle. Kind of silly.
I don't think. Let me see. Let's see what Reddit said. These motherfuckers out here. The first reference is in chapter 12. Last time it was chapter 18. So like, this book has 19 chapters. So, yeah, I don't think it has as much impact. Excuse us if we're wrong, but I just noticed that they make that a focal point, and I'll try to do more research the next time when it actually is more present in the story.
Yeah,
I'll elaborate on that. But it was just one of those things where adding more stuff, it's really not. It doesn't have the same representation in the original source material as it does in the movie, and it changes the whole dynamic of characters and what characters doing. Because I think Thorin, he gets obsessed with the stone, which is not an element in the book. Do you know what I mean? Like he's like, I need the stone, like and he gets consumed by the lure of money.
Well,
and,
I think
and treasure.
gold sickness is a thing in the book, and that's what his grandfather was going through.
But I think it was from the Arkenstone assisted in that.
I don't remember.
I don't either.
I can't
Excuse
speak
us.
on it.
Excuse us. Did you think the film did anything right?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it did a lot of things right. I think, Peter Jackson does have a way to be able to make you love the characters in ways and make you kind of feel good about them. It's just everything was like a pale image of the quality that they created in Lord of the Rings. So that's where it's like, did he do something right? Yeah, I feel like there was some stuff that was right, but it's just not as good as it could have been. That's the frustrating part.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the performances, Bilbo, Gandalf, and I think Thorin, even though it's nice, he's a little extra. They were cool. The acting it's solid. I think overall, like for what the script is, and Ian McClellan is just so good that he just.
It's very good. No, it's very good.
Did you notice they said golf in Middle Earth? And I was like, they played golf. They said golf in the beginning.
Yeah, they said it in the book too.
Yeah. So there's golf up in this motherfucker? Like
I guess so.
18?
The game of golf was invented by the, Bilbo's great grandfather or something.
Is that what the reference was?
Yeah, he chopped off someone's head or a goblin's head or something and then hit it so far that it landed into a rabbit hole, and then that was the game of golf that was invented.
Look at you reading and shit. I'm so proud of you. You retain it? Like, holy fuck. It's a new talent by John Smith.
Well, Gandalf says it in this one, whereas it was it was J.R.R. Tolkien saying it as the narrator, but Gandalf takes that on to himself to say that, and then Bilbo almost brushes it off as there's funny stories that people make up all the time. It's
Yeah, there was the Hobbit that could ride a horse, Bandobras. And I feel like a spinoff, that's the kind of shit that I think is acceptable, and while still respecting an author or source material, is a character that's completely irrelevant. And then when you do the spinoff, you don't try to tie in characters that are from the original lore, and it's just a standalone whatever, and it's just this giant hobbit.
Well, it's funny it's funny you say that, because I just was watching Dune Prophecy, which I won't give you any spoilers away, even though I know you don't really care.
I don't care at all.
I was just talking about how they took the world that Dune was in, made a story 10,000 years prior to where Dune 1 starts. That is the epitome of what you should do. And I think Star Wars, for example, in that sense, where it's you want to make a spinoff on Star Wars, cool. Take the world that exists, take the lore, make a fucking movie about the beginning of the Jedi Council or something. Completely so far in the past that it can have zero impact on what you've originally created. So that way you can't ruin it. Instead, we get fucking the Obi-Wan show where he fucking fights Darth Vader again and lets him go again. And you're bro.
He works at a meat market.
Yeah, it's bro, what the fuck?
He's got a job.
Seriously, it's the stupidest fucking shit of all time. It's how are you going to break lore because you just want to give us these fucking characters? It's not about the characters. It's about the world that it exists in that you can expand on. And that's the problem with this Rings of Power show, right? Is you're trying to depict directly from the source material, again, doing a fucking terrible job at doing so, and not respecting the lore whatsoever, not respecting the original writer's intent whatsoever, because you only have half the rights to the lore that you're even fucking writing about. So you shouldn't even fucking do that, Bezos. Go fuck yourself. It's like, literally, you should completely create, if you want to make a spinoff and you want to make it your own story, take the world that exists, that was created, and make something that has so little relevance to the story that we love. And Dune Prophecy did that fucking phenomenally. It was like, cool, we love this world that exists, this universe. 10,000 years in the past, this shit happened. It has zero impact. Zero. Like 10,000 years, there's not a single thing that can carry over from that show into what the lore that's loved, right? Not one thing. It's 10,000 years is way too long of a time. We're talking about hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and thousands of generations of people, right?
Not that many, but yeah.
10,000?
Hundreds of thousands.
10,000 years? No, I'm saying hundreds and hundreds and thousands. So not hundreds of thousands. Sorry. I said it stood still, but
are you okay?
I'm fucking juiced up right now, man.
It's frustrating because there's a lot of mistakes that run parallel with this movie in the world of Hollywood with filmmaking. 100%. So there's a lot of ties to that. The last thing regarding what you consider to be the worst scene in The Hobbit is the shit in Misty Mountain. Even the way that they captured the dwarves was different. They noticed their ponies were gone. The ponies weren't even in the cave, but the ponies were gone, and there was a door in the back of the cave rather than a trapdoor that they fell down within.
Yep.
And then Gandalf kills the Goblin King differently.
Yep.
It's like he appears because they're all captured, and they're like, "Oh shit, Gandalf's here!" And then he's like, "Run, motherfuckers!" And then they run rather than like this action-filled additional bullshit, more chase scene nonsense. Even though there was chasing, it's just it rolled out way. Well,
even the way Bilbo falls into the deep, like he was on someone's back in the book, and then
he woke up with the ring next to him rather than seeing
it fall out of.
Which I did that kind of shit. I didn't hate. Like that was okay because then in a movie setting, whatever.
But it also breaks continuity. We saw Bilbo pick up the ring in dirt. And what's this in Lord of the Rings? And then now all of a sudden he walks up to it and just like, oh. It's like different. You could have used the same shot or same effect. Instead, you change that because you're like, I just want to make the story different. It's like, what the fuck? You already did this. You already made this shot.
I take back what I said. You're right. 100%.
Silly. Dude.
I'm being too lenient.
100%, bro. It's like you're breaking your own continuity that you made, Peter Jackson.
Peter Jackson, what the fuck, boy?
You did it. You made it.
Okay. So what did you think? Let's talk about I'm gonna circle back to book shit and talk about a couple things and things overall about the story. But one of the last things I wanted to talk about regarding the film was the end sequence, with the wolves or the wargs and the orcs, and they're in the treetops, and how they just changed that whole sequence and for the worse. For instance, Gandalf contacts the eagles and it was a tip of the cap to when he's trapped on top of Saruman's tower. Okay, you want to add it, whatever. But that's also different. And then just the way the trees had fell, and each dwarf, every single one of them was able to traverse to the new tree while their tree was falling towards the end of the cliff, was just way over the top. And then they all end up trying to aid in the fight of the orcs after the wargs flee and save Thorin, who got his fucking ass handed to him. And just all that was just not what happened. And
Bilbo has a heroic moment.
Yeah, which is just dumb.
It's silly.
Because the eagles just show up and eagles talk.
100%. And that's another part that we were talking about that they take out. You take out this whole sequence of eagles communicating about what's going on, being interested in what's going on, exploring what's going on, and then also after the fact talking to Gandalf about the reason they can't fly him farther. I genuinely thought the first time I watched this movie, I was like, why the fuck did the eagles not just fly him to the fucking mountain? I don't understand this.
In the book, it says they don't want to go
because they talk. Right?
Yeah, and I still think they could have brought him a lot further. And I also want to say the biggest plot armor that I can consciously be aware of is eagles in Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. It's the biggest plot armor I've ever fucking seen, and people are gonna hate that I'm saying this, but it's so true. The Eagles always show up to save, whether it's Frodo, Gandalf, or the dwarves. They just show up because what else are you gonna do in these situations to make it not super?
Yeah, and I think that's where the movies do the Lord a huge disservice. Because eagles can communicate, you understand that eagles in the Lord of the Rings are these super hyper spiritual beings. They're almost at a higher tier, I think, than wizards are in Middle Earth in the sense of intelligence.
I don't think so.
I think they are.
Wizards?
Yeah.
No fucking way.
You can look it up. In the sense of intelligence and also like the beings they are, they're godlike. They're not just species. They're like gods in Middle Earth. And because of that, you don't get any of that in Lord of the Rings. And if you understood that, and you understood they were not only intelligent beings, but they were also godlike beings, and they were pushing things in certain ways because of what they wanted to have happen. Granted, also in the Lord of the Rings, they don't entirely care that much about the what's going on with the world of men and elves and goblins and shit. They don't particularly care, but they're like these beings that when they choose to be involved, they'll involve themselves because they are like, look, we don't really fuck with orcs like that. And that's what was said in the books is they're like, yeah, we don't really fuck with orcs. Like, we're going to go like check out what these orcs are doing and like go fuck them up real quick. And that's like how they got involved to begin with. What are you reading?
So it says the eagles, they're a different order and are wind spirits the way that Balrog is a fire spirit. The eagles seem to have done, this is from some motherfucker on some nerd. It sounds accurate though. The eagles seem to have donned physical shapes and breed as Thorondor was their ancestor. They are powerful, but of less interventionist nature than Gandalf. In some ways, like Radagast, they have lost themselves to Arda and the nature. Some even poach sheep from human farmers like simple animals. So I think I'm right in saying that they're not equivalent to a wizard's stature. And
interventionist, meaning they just don't intervene into the world of men as much as Gandalf, but they are higher beings than Gandalf is in the world.
They just said in some ways, like Radagast, they have lost themselves to Arda and the nature, but
meaning like they're just like that doesn't make Radagast less of a wizard than Gandalf is. It just means that he is because he's a brown wizard, but nonetheless, it just means that they've lost themselves into the wilderness. But they are. Okay. Correct me if I'm wrong, please. If you're watching this, they are these extremely powerful beings in Middle Earth.
No, 100%. I'm not disagreeing that they're powerful. I just think wizards, my depiction is they've been like assigned to look. They're like guardian angels of Middle Earth, and eagles aren't on that same stature.
They are. If you look up, like, if you do like a quick search of like the ranking of power in Middle Earth, Middle Earth characters' ranking of power, you'll see that they're at a higher rank than like or tier or whatever. But yeah, so you just get none of that in the movie. You get none of that kind of understanding that they're not just these mindless creatures that just get called upon whenever fucking Gandalf wants them.
I don't know these terms, these nerdy ass fucking terms where they're talking as far as levels of stature in Middle Earth. I'm sorry, everybody. I'm not equipped for this. I'm not. It's a lot.
Yeah, but like, where the eagles land in this?
Well, I feel like eagles are on the same level as dragons, and I feel like wizards are higher than dragons. Is my point.
I don't think they are. They're gods, dude. From what I understand, they're
dragons.
Gods. No, eagles are gods.
All right, we're gonna have to tap into this later.
Well, yeah, we can. But nonetheless, correct me if I'm wrong. If you're listening and you're a fan, and I am misguided, let me know. But nonetheless, you don't get that at all, and that's the essence of what we're both saying, regardless of where they rank in the tier of
they're
power.
Just like some eagles.
They're just like they just seem like they're just like Gandalf's like little. He has like a little zoo of eagles that he keeps for his like convenience, you know. And if that were the case. And the reason some of the stuff doesn't work is because you're like, well, if that were the case, then why can't Gandalf just have the eagles fly them to Mordor? Like, to begin with. Like, hey, eagles, come fly Frodo to Mordor, and he'll just drop the ring off on top of Mount Doom into the fire from the eagle's fucking claw. Like, why? You know what I mean? It's like, why does that not work? Well, the reason is because the eagles don't give a fuck. They don't care. They're like, we are doing our own fucking thing. We don't get involved with the bullshit that's going down there because we're up here.
But then they do all the time.
Right, and the reason is because from what I understand is there's some favor that Gandalf did for the Eagle King at some point. I think it says that in the book. Yeah. And so they have some relationship that's gone on in the past, and therefore that's why they're like willing to help Gandalf in certain ways, but that's just because of Gandalf. It's literally not because of anybody else. So shout out to Gandalf for going out there and networking and making plugs with some powerful ass beings who usually don't give a fuck, but they like Gandalf because motherfucker's a gangster. Like, turn up.
Turn up. So, yeah, I mean, plot armor king of all time is the Eagles in Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit.
I see what you're saying. I see your insight on it.
I ain't mad about it. I'm just saying, like, when people want to be Lord of the Rings fans and say that it's impenetrable of their fucking literature, it suck my dick. The Eagles, boom. Like, plot armor. It ain't get thicker than that. So, what I want to say about the book is I really like the pace of the Hobbit, because you talk about it's like this little side story. You could tell we didn't finish reading it. I've read it one other time, but you could tell the pace of it is really pleasing. It's always moving strongly and effectively and informatively, and it's even when it's in lulls or seems like a developmental period, it's still enjoyable because it's just got a good pace to it. I thought overall. Did you feel that way?
Yeah.
I found a little fun fact that I didn't know about, but there was multiple revisions of the original text of The Hobbit. And I think...
From J.R.R. Tolkien?
Yes. Like, he made the revisions.
Makes sense, because he made that first, and then he made The Lord of the Rings. So when he went and made The Lord of the Rings, he probably had to go back and be like, I got to fix some stuff and change some stuff.
Which also is another thing where people were like, oh, it's the best piece of literature or whatever. It also had revisions, which I think is interesting. I'm not saying that dismisses it, but it's a con if you're doing pros and cons to what's the best ever. Like, if he's making revisions post-release, something to be talked about.
Yeah, and I found out recently that the J.R.R. Tolkien was really good friends with the guy who made Narnia. I don't know the author's name.
C.S. Lewis?
C.S. Lewis, yeah. So C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien were friends and also competing with one another. So they were like competitor friends, which is kind of cool because like I feel like me and you can relate to that in the sense of like we are really good friends and we want to see each other succeed in our creative endeavors, but we're always like competing with one another in a positive way to be like, yo, you got to go harder. I got to go harder. You got to go harder.
I didn't know there was a competition.
No, like in a good way, like a friendly competition.
I mean like I'm far.
Okay, got you. No competition.
Like there's no competition.
Yeah,
thank you.
But
thank you very much.
But that's probably how both of them felt as well, which is cool. It's a cool kind of concept. But I think where I'm referencing that, what I'm trying to say is that part of the weight that J.R.R. Tolkien has in the sense of how good this literature is it really was one of the foundations of fantasy literature, and it started it. Whereas like a lot of what people came afterwards were using him as inspiration. Which when you talk about hip hop music, for example, and I'm not going to go into too much detail, but people will say like, "Oh, Nas is the best rapper of all time" or whatever, and I'm always like, Nas's music's trash. To me, whoa. I don't like it. Because I listen to it and I'm just like, I don't care. But I get the concept of, well, Nas is a foundation point of the music industry and how it evolved. And if it wasn't for Nas, like music wouldn't be where it is today. So, and he's just one example of that. You can use many others, but I understand that concept. So there's a weight to not only how good the literature is, but also the fact how innovative it was and how different it was and how much of a foundation it was for the genre in general. Moving forward, like even Harry Potter is probably a lot of inspiration from Lord of the Rings, and 100%, and obviously George R.R. Martin and Game of Thrones is a huge inspiration from 100%. Lord of the Rings. I mean, he even put double R's in his name just with dots next to him.
Did he?
Yeah,
he's just like a super fan.
George R.R. Martin. J.R.R.
I
Tolkien.
fucking know. Okay. So, one question I had that I don't think is elaborated in the book either is why did they decide, the dwarves and Gandalf, to go on the journey now? What was the... We're going now.
In the movie, it was like they were saying there was ravens flying back, and this was some kind of sign that they had for when in the tales they said that when the ravens go back to the Misty Mountain, it's some sign or whatever. I don't know if that was referenced in the book though.
Yeah, I don't recall.
I don't recall.
So when, and I know you can answer this question, the reason why when Bilbo or Gollum, when putting the ring on in this time frame, Sauron's generals aren't in existence. Sauron doesn't have enough power yet. He's just lurking in the abyss, kind of like waiting, gathering power.
The way Peter Jackson described it is like the ring hasn't awoken yet, and doesn't have the power that it's going to have later on, and that's why it had so much more control. And like the Nazgul don't even exist yet. That's like kind of what the whole necromancer is doing because of the Immortal Blade or whatever. They found that, Radagast found that, so that's like the Nazgul don't exist. So you know how like when Frodo puts on the ring, the Nazgul can locate it at that point. That hasn't happened yet, and that's why the Gollum's just been able to use the ring in
because it's still canon. Is my question.
I don't know exactly the difference between the book lore and the movie, but that's just what it was described as in the movie, which I think makes sense. I think it's a good reasoning for it.
I accept it. I figured it was he hadn't gathered his power enough to formulate the Nazgul and everything. Yeah. So like utilization of the ring still went unnoticed.
Right, because the ring and Sauron are like two separate entities that are only at its full potential when they're together. So the stronger Sauron gets, the stronger the ring gets, and vice versa. Right? True. So they're
ring talk.
It's a dichotomy or something that you could say, or whatever.
You're done.
To be able to have that power increase, Sauron not being powerful right now at this point, the ring is just an invisibility tool.
Okay, thank you for that, John Smith. That is your ring update at the movie Rant Break. What do you think, though, worst additions to the movie that wasn't in the book that you could tell from the first 6 chapters? Because if I didn't make that clear, apologies. This movie is based off the first 6 chapters, and then the second movie is the next 6 chapters, and then the final movie is based off the last 7 chapters. So, worst additions.
The worst addition is the pale orc thing. And especially just the execution of it and the CGI and the mess. I mean, they shot the scene on Weathertop like a week before it released in the theaters. Like they were just like, fuck, we gotta like add more shit because it's too boring if we don't do this. It's just stupid. It's like you created this character that was referenced in the book again, but not in present time, and just had this antagonist to be able to push the story along, and you made him a really ugly big CGI mess, and you did so much disservice to the story because of it.
Okay. Best additions or appreciated additions to the movie that wasn't in the book of The Hobbit?
I think the Doggledore sequence, the abandoned castle or whatever with the necromancer in it, and
with
Radagast. So like that sequence of just seeing the necromancer and what that is, I think that's an interesting aspect. Even later in the later films, I know like Gandalf goes there and shit.
But there's like this fight that doesn't happen.
Yeah, but I don't hate that. I think it's interesting to see it, and the way they depict it is cool and scary and has that real kind of like terrifying feel to it, and I like that. That's what I think Lord of the Rings did so good at throughout its entirety, is making things scary, and not like horror film scary or like scary movie scary, but like there's a terror there and there's a darkness, like a real darkness. And you and me are both the same, where it's like when shit gets dark, we like it better. You also have more of an intrigue of the goofy funky things in movies, like not goofy. I would say more like really high fantasy stuff, right? Like some of the stuff you really like. Like for example, I remember I told you when I first watched these movies, like I didn't like Smaug in the way that this dragon talks, and you're like, I love Smaug. I think he's so cool. And like just a dragon talking to me is like I'm just not. It just kind of throws me out. Like I like the dragons in House of Dragon and Game of Thrones better in the sense of like they're just like these crazy nasty creatures that can't speak, right?
Well, that would be my preference as well. I just think Smaug as a character is cool.
No, swag. But for me, like we both like that darkness and that
like to say that your phrasing I don't think was correct when you're like goofy. It wasn't fantasy when you are a fan of a Wookiee. like what are we doing here? Like you're maybe
that's sci-fi, but yeah, it's different. But I guess like
I'm just saying.
I don't know. We've always had the same conversation about our preferences, and I've never been able to pinpoint it very well. But like I've always said the same thing about the Harry Potter series, for example. The thing I don't like about it is the thing that you like about it, and I can't tell you.
Which is what?
Which is like wizards and spells.
Well, like that's not it though.
No, I know, but I'm saying
but you say you know, but you're saying that's the reason, and I'm saying no, it's not.
No, I'm saying it's something I don't like about it that you do like about it.
I don't particularly like wands
and wizards.
I like wizards, but I'm saying like, and this
and
is
spells?
I'm not spoiling like some of these episodes because I have some comments that I'm going to make on those episodes. But you're saying that you know, but then saying the wrong thing about why I like things. But
exactly. I told you that I was wrong. Like I told you, I don't know how to identify it. So
yeah, but then you went to say, oh, you like the wizards and the wands. Like I like things about it, but that's not the thing that's drawing me.
Facts, and that's what I meant. I didn't say. I didn't
mean.
I
didn't mean
to
say attached to everything. Like I said, I'm not going to get into it because there's some points I'm going to make on those episodes that are coming up soon. So
for
I'm not
sure,
going to get into it.
For sure.
But there was a point in the movie and the book where Bilbo has the opportunity to kill Gollum. And it ties into a Gandalf quote about knowing when to take a life rather than keep one, whatever. What do you think would have happened if Bilbo decided to kill Gollum in that moment? Like, what would have happened in the whole trajectory of all the Lord of the Rings shit? Middle Earth.
I don't know. I mean, there's the fact that Gollum was the reason Sauron and the Nazgul knew that Bilbo had the ring because he was captured and he was like, Baggins! Shire!
That was incredible. Thank you for that.
So without that, maybe it doesn't kick off the whole sequence of being chased out of the Shire with Frodo, and whether or not that would kick off the expedition at that time, or whether the expedition would feel the need to be so urgent could be a major play, right? Where maybe Gandalf goes a different route. He's like, hey, we have time. We can plan this whole thing out to get the ring there. Let's just keep it in the Shire for some time. Maybe we just leave it in the Shire because he doesn't know where it is and it's hidden and we don't even try to destroy it. So like that whole trajectory could have happened. And then on the flip side, if for some reason they did find out the ring was in the Shire and they did decide to go on the same journey and et cetera, and it was still as pressing as possible, there would have been a point in time where when Frodo and Sam were lost, they could have died on multiple occasions just not being able to find their way to Mordor, because Gollum did help them get to Mordor and find their way, even though he did set them up to go get killed by a spider. But everything happens for a reason. And because they almost got killed by a spider, they got closer to the gate of Mordor to get in, and then the timing worked out perfect, and et cetera. So there's a lot of factors.
So do you think by sparing Gollum in that instance in The Hobbit, what it was the deciding factor whether Middle Earth would have been saved or not?
Could have been.
Do you think it's more leaning towards if he killed Gollum, Middle Earth would have perished, than by saving him or sparing him, they saved Middle Earth?
I think so, and I think that's what the story alludes to, in the sense of like sparing somebody can
save the world.
Save the world, yeah. Which I fundamentally agree with on a an earthly basis. Like I think that taking someone's life, no matter how awful that person might be, is playing God in a way, and you never know what kind of impact that person could have on someone else later on down the road. Like even a mass murderer, serial killer, you put him on death row and you kill him in jail. Like, yeah, I get it because he deserves it in ways, but it's also a situation where it's like, you never know. You leave him in jail until he dies, and maybe he has that one conversation with that other guy in prison that because he changes his ways at some point and he becomes a better person, and that person that leaves prison that he had a conversation with ends up saving millions of people or something. You know what I mean? It's just playing God and taking a life is, unless it's an absolute necessity, obviously, sometimes is...
When is it necessary?
Like when you're under attack, right? Like if you have to defend yourself, of course. But I don't think you have the right to play that role in the world in a way, and there's certain things you can do to punish people in so many ways without having to take their life, I guess is my point.
Like rape?
Like you rape somebody? No, but like I even think about like a pedophile, like a child rapist, for example, and you're gonna have to beep some of this out when you put it on the internet. But like do they deserve to die? Sure, but I think a better sentence is like life in prison and castration. Like, dude, you're a sicko. Cut their dick off and balls, and just be like, sorry,
I
dude.
think you could do like a catch and release on that one. Like if you castrate them and then like, okay, you're good. Like you're
good
done.
Luck.
You're done. Like you have nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like castrate the fuck out of every pedophile that has ever existed.
I think that's fair.
Like especially if it's like clear violent rape or like
violent.
You know what I mean?
Clear violent rape.
But you know what I'm saying? Don't castrate an 18-year-old for sleeping with a 16-year-old that they're in high school together she says he raped her. Or whatever, or the parents find out and they call it rape. Like, don't castrate that kid. Like, they were in a relationship. Like, I don't know what to tell you, but
that's what the other motherfuckers would say too. We're in a relationship. They got that whole.
Well, yeah, but if it's a 13-year-old girl and you're fucking 45, like, castrate the fuck out of you, dude. Like,
you're done.
You're done. Take your balls and dick. You're done, dude.
Is the first offense just balls and the second one's dick, or is it like dick then ball? Like,
no, just chop them off.
Both.
Of course.
Okay.
Like, you have no right to that, dude. You have right to life because I'm not God. And I can't tell you whether you should live or not, but I have all the right in the world to chop your fucking genitals off.
What's first offense?
Huh?
First
Doesn't
offense?
matter.
This is like one and done.
If it's clear, violent rape to a minor, like you don't deserve to have your dick and balls. And if you're a woman, because women do it too, and if you're a woman, you cut their clitoris off, whatever, sew their pussy.
They just don't do it though.
No, they do. That shit happens. You know how many fucking teachers will be sleeping with their kids and shit? Like,
but the guys like it. We like it. Let's be real. We like it.
It depends. If it's a 9-year-old, like no, like no.
But he might like it.
Yo, that's deep. It's still fucking twisted, but yeah.
So watch out, ladies. The clits. Okay. What?
Back on topic. The Hobbit, a child's story.
Yeah. No, you could have just said an unexpected journey. It's so funny. You didn't have to ruin it.
I know. I'm sorry.
You're trying to be Peter Jackson and change the source material.
Well, the unexpected journey wasn't even the name of this part of the book. Because they made names of the trilogy because there was no trilogy.
Oh, and there and back again. That's true. I was proven wrong. Whatever. That's true.
I think it's probably the name of chapter 1.
Let's check, folks.
We have the book on deck here.
Yes, we got the fucking book on deck. What the fuck? Let's see. An unexpected party. I see what you did there.
Oh my goodness, dude.
Yeah, let's look at the fucking...
An unexpected party is way cooler than an unexpected journey.
Yeah.
We like unexpected parties.
Yeah. They did a shout out at that last sequence. Out of the frying pan and into the fire.
Yeah.
Thanks, Gandalf.
Thanks, G-Dolph.
Do you have any fun facts about this film that you'd like to drop on the people?
No, I've dropped a lot of them thus far, like just about the filming process and Peter Jackson really went through it in this one too. Like he did not want to take this project on, and it did a lot of damage to him. They shot like fucking, I think 200 and something days straight 250 something days
for
straight.
this particular film or all of them.
Yeah, for this one, and
It's a lot.
it was just a whirlwind of shit show in a lot of ways, and because of the lack of pre-production, put a lot of stress on VFX artists and whatnot.
But you said the last sequence, which I noticed when we were watching the film, the gold in the castle or whatever.
Yeah, when the shot of Smog popping out of the gold at the end, that was filmed or finished the day before it released in theaters, and
it looked bad.
It looked terrible because they just rushed it, and it's like, just if there's one lesson to learn about this whole thing is like, if you want to make something cool, like take your time. Like,
Fuck with that.
I think that's probably the best advice ever.
Ever? No.
Well, in this circumstance, in this,
I mean, it's not bad advice, actually, if I'm being honest. But I mean,
if you want to make something cool,
let's reserve the right to have
not
something.
not ever. Sorry, I'm exaggerating.
You need to slow down with your exaggeration.
I do it a lot. I do it a lot.
And it's really.
I love it.
Let's
though.
make a change.
Let's rock. Let's double down.
No, let's not.
Let's double the fuck down on it, dude. This is the best fucking day of my life right now.
Yo, this motherfucker. I'll accept that. I accept that.
All right, fuck yeah.
So, what would you say? Give me your synopsis, overall rating. What you got?
Yeah. So, I mean, I as a Lord of the Rings fan was fundamentally disappointed when I first initially saw this, and now that I have the context of the book, I thoroughly understand why. Now, I haven't read the Lord of the Rings trilogy,
Which I think you should,
but I probably will now that I've dabbled into this journey. With
you like it,
Bilbo? Yeah, it was cool, and I listened to the Andy Serkis version.
Oh, he got read too,
which was $15.
Damn,
still like whoa, like that's a little steep, but I was like, you know what, fuck it.
Gollum's gotta get paid.
Yeah, and Andy Serkis did a really good job at reading it, so I don't read much, so that having him read it for me was nice. I kept saying I read the book. I didn't read it. I had it read to me.
Figures.
But it was a cool little ride, and Andy Serkis is obviously the fucking shit and does such a good job at the voices and the interpretations, and even the singing he did pretty good at, which is cool. But now with the context of the book, I think I understand more why I don't like this movie. I think it's because a lot of it was taken into the hands of these producers and directors and writers to be able to make their own story and do whatever they want. And you see that and you feel that when watching it. I think the biggest, most egregious thing is just how much CGI was used. The Lord of the Rings originally used CGI for the big massive scale battles and whatnot, and there was CGI used for certain characters, etc. But for the most part, anything they could make real, they did. And this movie would have been, I think, 5 to 7 times better had it been using real practical effects, whether it comes to the goblins and the orcs or even just the sets and the locations and all of that. So I think fundamentally, because of all of that and because of my feelings of this movie from the first time I saw it till now, I'm going to give it a 5.2.
Nice. Now, I agree with pretty much everything you said for the most part. I think we're in cahoots with just the overall feeling of the movie, and I'm glad we're in the same pocket of score too. I want to say again that bad makeup, bad costume design overall. I think the movie should be a 2-part rather than a 3-part, and it shouldn't equate to over 7 hours and break the story up that much and add a bunch of stuff that wasn't part of the original story. And just in general, just don't add stuff that's not part of the source material. Like point blank. If you're gonna add a minor thing, okay, but this is not even close to the original story of The Hobbit, and we're just in the first third of the book. And it's just too much of an overhaul on the narrative and just a disservice to the author and the story. And that being said, I still enjoyed the film, and I can enjoy the films. I think they're not utter trash. It's not necessarily a bad movie or anything. It's just a disservice source material and just adding too much for the studio's desires And it just, at the end of the day, is bullshit and pretty disrespectful to the author and the fans. So I'm going to hit it with a 5 out of 10. And I think that's fair. I mean, we could both go way lower if we wanted to really lean into this isn't the story of the Hobbit, because it's not. And people could be like, you book readers, but it's like, what the fuck? This is not the story. You're adding so much.
Yeah, but even the movie in and of itself, just without even the book context, it's still just not good. I didn't know the book prior to watching it the first time, and I still had the same feeling about it. One last little trivia piece is Hobbiton was rebuilt for this movie, and it has been left ever since, and you can go visit it out in New Zealand and actually do a little tour, and it's still there. Where they had gotten rid of it after the Lord of the Rings trilogy, they had like tore it all down and made it back to normal. Whereas this one, it's still there now, and you can go see it. And my sister has actually done that before, which is cool.
You said that in one of the shows. Why do you think they tore it down originally?
I think it was just because they didn't realize how big the whole thing was going to be. So like,
because they filmed them back to back to back, and like, oh fuck,
they're like, okay, yeah, like we're gonna have a movie, but they didn't realize it was going to be a cultural movement the way it was, and how many people would be interested in going back and seeing it, and the farmers who own that land like get profited off of people visiting, which is cool. It's cool to like give back to the community in New Zealand. So I think that's tight, but a little fun fact.
Oh, cool. Do you want to throw some plugs out?
Yeah, you already know what the fuck going on. It's John Smith. I appreciate you for having me here. One up. You are always a gracious host, and I'm thankful to be here.
I fed you lobster and everything.
Dude, we had some really good lobster last night because we are in this great grand state of Maine. Turn up.
Represent.
Out here from LA. You already know what the fuck it is. But yeah, I have a bunch of music out that I've dropped this year, so please go in and tap into some of that. You can always reach me on Instagram at MG_Johnny Smith, or you can just go on Google and type in John X Smith and see all my platforms, including YouTube. Drop some new music videos and new content always, and I have some music on the way. I am continuously working and dropping, and it's gonna keep applying that pressure. So thank you for having me here.
Absolutely. So one last little fuck you, studios, for changing source material for monetary gain and ruining literature and things we love. You guys are assholes as always for doing that. And I just want to thank everybody for listening to this episode with John Smith, my guest. As always, holding it down. And yeah, I hope everybody doing well out there. I, for real, appreciate listening to this episode. And we got the other Hobbit ones that'll be, what you looking at?
I was looking at what you were looking at.
I'm not looking at anything.
Oh.
We have other episodes that will be coming out periodically. We're going to do the second and third one, hopefully in 2025. Get that shit done whenever you're in town out from LA. So, yeah, be on the lookout for that. And I hope this was informative, enjoyable, and I love all y'all. I will check you next episode. Deuces.
Peace.